Hello, all, and welcome to the first installment of IWBI's Well Executive webcast series. I'm Rachel Hodgdon, your host and president and CEO of IWBI, and I am thrilled to be kicking off this series, which will showcase leaders who know that when their people thrive, so too will their businesses. Leaders who acknowledge that achieving peak performance requires self-care and that modeling that self-care sets the tone for their entire organization. Through the Well Executive platform, I'll be introducing you to some truly iconic leaders across a variety of sectors and geographies and give you the opportunity to hear directly from the source how they take care of their people, their stakeholders and customers, and of course, how they take care of themselves. I'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsor, Daikin, leading innovation in heating, air conditioning, and ventilation technology for over 100 years, whose generous support makes this interview and the Well Executive platform writ large possible. So let's get right into it. I could not be more excited that this series will start with a conversation with the legendary Dr. Richard Carmona, the 17th Surgeon General of the United States and a founding member of the IWBI Governance Council, recently having been dubbed chair as he serves in his third consecutive term. Welcome, Dr. Carmona.
Rachel, happy to be with you. Always look forward to our conversations.
Very much the same here, and especially this one, so that all of the amazing folks on the line get a glimpse into some of what I get exposed to on a regular basis, which is your hallmark brand of leadership. I want to start by telling all who are on the line just a little bit more about our Governance Council, a key group of global thought leaders, doctors, public health professionals, academics, business executives, who are ultimately responsible for helping IWBI to uphold the rigor and integrity of the WELL standard and its evidence-backed strategies, and who provide our team at IWBI with invaluable guidance as we seek to accelerate market transformation at a global scale. Over the course of this year and into 2026, I'll be introducing you to all of our Governance Council members, 19 extraordinary executives from all over the world, through a series of up-close interviews, just like the one that we're about to have. So today, we'd love to hear from you. As you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and I'll try and sprinkle them in throughout our conversation. I can genuinely say that there are few people I admire as much as Dr. Richard Carmona. His unflagging optimism, his unending wisdom, his deep compassion, and the integrity and heart he brings to everything he does. And if you know me, you know that I am not someone who is prone to hyperbole. Dr. Carmona is all of that and so much more. His long career of service began in Harlem at the age of 12 when he was tasked with caring for his three younger siblings while his mom worked nights. Over the next 60 years, he's held various leadership positions from combat zones in Vietnam as a decorated member of the U.S. Special Forces Group to the Pima County Sheriff's Department to a struggling county hospital system in Arizona to being the Surgeon General of the United States. You're going to hear his whole rap sheet in just a moment. At every stop, how Dr. Carmona takes care of those who he leads and those whom he serves is illuminating and instructive. And he has long embraced that tending to his own well-being and health is fundamental to his success. You could say that this former nation's doctor writes and follows his own prescriptions. So Dr. Carmona, to get us started and in the spirit of this series, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are you feeling today?
I'd give it about an 8 or a 9, Rachel. There's always room for improvement, so I've never reached the perfection, but I'm working on it. It's a lifelong journey.
In pursuit of the 10. All right, I'm with you on that one. I still look back on that webcast that you and I did during the pandemic as my favorite webcast of all times. And one of the things that was most memorable to me, and I think to many others, was that when that moment when you attempted to name all of the many jobs that you have ever had in 1 minute flat. Now, lucky for you, in prepping for this webcast, we were not able to pull the original list to see if you could actually beat your original number. Alas, it's no longer in the archive. So you're only competing against the clock again today, not against your past performance. But just for fun, Dr. Carmona, in 1 minute flat, name as many of the jobs that you have ever had as possible. I'm going to set the timer here. And are you ready? Set, go.
Let's say my first job working in a mailroom in New York City when I dropped out of high school, worked at Shea Stadium and Yankee Stadium selling hot dogs and peanuts as a kid. U.S. Army, Special Forces, combat, been a registered nurse, a paramedic, a police officer, a homicide detective, ran a SWAT team, moved on educationally, always thinking about going to medical school eventually, but had to make a living. So I think I mentioned the ocean lifeguard part, and a lot of my time spent in jobs that were, in fact, public service, just every one of the jobs. Ultimately, fortunate enough to get to medical school and train as a general vascular surgeon, a critical care doc, and trauma, burns, and critical care. Let's see what else. And then I promoted up to become a professor and a distinguished professor and a laureate professor in health, pharmacology, and in business. And
That's fun.
is that it? and
We didn't even get through the whole list.
No, and then Surgeon General, and a few things in between there. But I'd say most of them, if you sum them up, are in public service, which I really love to do because I feel so fortunate having accomplished what I haven't been able to accomplish because of good people who were mentors and helped me as I failed repeatedly as a child. And so I just have this drive that I always want to give back and return what I have done. As one social worker told me when I was a young paramedic, a registered nurse working a night shift, going to college during the day, she said to me, you're going to be real successful someday, but I want you to remember something. She was a Hispanic woman, worked with underserved communities. And she said, when you take that elevator up to the top floor, make sure you send it down for somebody else. And it always weighed on my mind that is a responsibility of all of us in leadership positions to bring everybody up with you.
I want to talk a little bit more about that approach to legacy and cultivating the next generation of leaders as we get deeper into our conversation. But what a span of things that you have done in your lifetime. And in fact, the span of things that you do today in your current scope of responsibilities, advisories, board seats, things you volunteer for is also truly mind-boggling. So I am going to set the timer one more time for 1 minute. And I'm going to ask you to, in 1 minute flat, name all of the things that you currently do with your time. Ready and go.
Okay, for a number of years was the CEO of Canyon Ranch Corporation. We sold the company, but I've stayed on as the chief of innovation and essentially of counsel to help them guide their growth and development moving forward. I have 5 startups, Nuvox, Dr. Kumo, Fan Huddle, Alley Connect, Mindstream, which are digital startups in the health and wellness space. I sit on a couple of public boards now, McKesson and Herbalife, termed off of Axon Industries because of time. And a lot of community at different levels where I'm engaged with trying to improve the health, safety, or security of a community. Everything from pandemic preparedness, emergency preparedness, up to policy at a national and global level.
Did you mention University of Arizona?
Oh, yeah. I said earlier that I have a laureate professorship there at the University of Arizona in several departments.
Amazing. And I can think of a few that maybe didn't even make that list where you are serving in like a more informal kitchen cabinet. So many of us calling upon you for all of that advice. So thank you. Thank you for all of your service and all of the different ways in which you
back at you. I appreciate the opportunity because under your leadership, we've done something that's extraordinary and deemed almost impossible to unite the world around a common value proposition of building better to improve the health, safety, and security of a community or the world.
Well, you may have just answered my next question, Dr. Carmona, but with so many different responsibilities and a family to care for ongoing, why did you ultimately say yes to 3 consecutive terms on the Governance Council?
Well, it really started out with, I love surrounding myself with people that are innovators, that are market disruptors, that see bigger pictures, that are unwilling to settle for the status quo. And one day I was in New York and having lunch with a guy named Paul Shalla. And he had some great ideas about, and challenging me. He said, well, how come you guys have never given any thought to how you build things to make them healthier? And I started thinking about that and recognized, wow, what a glaring omission that we have just let this be done arbitrarily by somebody's whim as to what the color should be or where the door should be. And from that started the discussion that led to, well, and Paul had asked me early on, well, I think this is good. You want to be part of it? And I said, yes. But that's why I joined, because I love finding new things that can make communities and the world a better place. And since I feel very fortunate to have accomplished what I've accomplished, because so many people took care of me to get me there, it's my responsibility to pay it back, to educate new leaders, to have people not be satisfied with the status quo, to make things better, to help raise the next leaders in our next generations. All of those things are ones that are very important to me.
Dr. Carmona, you and I have talked about the fact that when you were serving as Surgeon General, it never really occurred to you that the built environment played a formative role in our state of health and well-being. In fact, an outsized role, physical and social environments, having more bearing on our state of health, according to the social determinants of health, than, for instance, our genetics or even our access to healthcare. Talk a little bit about that. Like, why do you, and a lot of your Surgeons General colleagues have said the same. Why do you think that this is, I don't know, like, why do you think this isn't widely understood or known amongst other medical professionals, including the nation's leading medical professionals?
Well, I think that it's been overlooked because there's so much distractions in the environment, everything from A to Z. And then we had COVID, for instance, where we're all focused. But what the other thing that COVID does was able to demonstrate to us how poorly our built environment was to protect us. Prior to COVID, nobody knew what a HEPA filter was. Now every citizen knows what a HEPA filter is, and they want to know what kind of filtration you have. And then there's ingress and egress in buildings. And then you start going to the next level of science, and you realize that the building itself is an epigenetic input that can actually cause positive gene expression. Okay, whether it's lowering your blood pressure, making you feel happy, the colors on a wall, the temperature, the humidity, the ingress, the egress, the safety you feel, all of those things. So I started to feel guilty in the beginning when I said, why didn't we think of this before? Why did we leave it just to happenstance that buildings get built? So that's why I was so excited when Paul and you and others decided to put this together, and I could be a part of it because it was something new that was going to add value, not only to our community, but to the world. And now we are, in fact, global as it relates to providing all of that insight. So I'm thrilled. Last thing I'll mention to you, a lot of the things that drove me was I remember growing up very poor in an immigrant family living in New York City in Harlem. And I remember sleeping with my clothes on in the winter because there was no heat. I remember roaches and mice in the house. And I remember repeated pulmonary infections that I had. And I remember the paint peeling off the walls, which I thought was a nuisance until years later I found out it had lead in it because it was 60, 70-year-old paint. So when I think of that, what would my life for me and my brothers and my sister and my parents have been if we were in a healthy apartment, where you had the heat, where you had guaranteed warm water, where things were clean, all of that. And so, I remember garbage piled through all the yards because people didn't pick up their garbage. And so all of those have deleterious health effects, but they all relate directly to the built environment. So a lot of it starts personal, and then I can bring it forward to even being Surgeon General and traveling the world and seeing how much better we can do.
Yeah, I think that's a profound point about it starting personal. And as many people as I meet who have never really considered at all the impact of the built environment on their health and well-being, when they're introduced to that concept, can reflect upon their own experiences and think about all of the times when their physical environments have made them unwell. And this was like one of the hopes that I carried through the pandemic, was that, all of a sudden the general public was so incredibly aware of the impact that their physical surroundings were having on their health, safety, and well-being. Like maybe it was because you were afraid to get into the elevator. Maybe it was because you were more productive working from home. Maybe it was because you realized that your work environment could have a substantial impact on whether you contracted COVID or not. we have seen through pandemics of the past, airborne disease pandemics specifically, that there's a coming together around, public health and building design and operations. Like, hey, we're in this together, and the built environment has a role to play. And then we have seen that in the past that has fractured. When the pandemic ceases, everybody wants to go back to living their life the way they did before. Where do you think we are today, a couple years after COVID-19?
I think it's a great question. I think, Rachel, that we are a little bit more informed. I think that there is still a sense of what did we learn from this 4-year experience and how are we applying it? But I also see the complacency starting to set in, that we just go back to our old ways again. But what I'm really happy about is, being able to drive this globally, number one. Number two, in academic centers, as I travel the country and the world, these are discussions that continue. Okay, so it has resonated to the level that it's become a to-do list, somebody, and they're not letting it go. So I don't think we're there yet. And I think that's the benefit of that we become the thought leaders for the world, that we keep reminding people of how important the built environment is and not to take it for granted, but build with purpose for the environment you're in and what you're trying to achieve, and that's really what we do best. So it's one of the things that I'm so passionate about, because how often in life do you really get a chance to change the world? We joke about those things. Let's do something big. Let's make it better. This is what WELL is doing. It has the opportunity to change every life in the world if people will just listen as it relates to how to build better for the future.
Beautifully said. I want to come back to another way in which the work that you have done has changed the world. And that has to do with how you've led over the course of your career. One of my goals through the WELL Executive Platform is to really capture these lessons in leadership as core and fundamental to driving more change that we want to see in the world. One of the things that you and I have talked about, especially since I took the helm as CEO of IWBI, is how easy it is for people to stop telling you the hard things. There was like this weird thing that happened. I was president before I was CEO. Today I'm president and CEO, where somehow when I took on that new title, without having taken on really much in the way of additional responsibilities, people started like treating me differently within my own organization. It became harder and harder to ensure that I was getting the bad news in real time.
Yes.
And this is something that I live in constant fear of, because I've seen that other leaders around me who I really admire have gotten themselves into this position where somehow they maybe are telegraphing, or implying that they don't want to hear that bad news. People stop sharing it. And that could be the downfall of so many organizations, or psychological safety for any number of reasons gets eroded over time. And people don't feel comfortable raising their hand to say that things aren't going as well as perhaps the leader may think that things are going. So I want you to talk about what you've done in some of those biggest positions of responsibility that you have held to really cultivate that that psychological safety and the preciousness of that dynamic with your team.
Happy to do so. And first and foremost, it's about leadership. And I teach leadership still for military classes. Young officers who want to become admirals and generals go through a program, and we have what's called war colleges, master's degree in strategic leadership and a number of other things. But what they're really teaching is they're moving from a position where their scope and scale of leadership is going to get very large when they move up to that position. But when I teach leadership, the first slide I often will show is a picture of me at 12 years old. And then I will show several pictures of me in different jobs and at one end, the other end is that of Surgeon General. And I'll ask the class, what do they have in common? Each of those positions require leadership. A mom telling her 12-year-old son that he was responsible for your 2 younger brothers and sister because I'm at work at night. Make sure they get to bed, make sure they eat. I'll see you in the morning. That's a leadership role. Why? Because all leaders are responsible for the destiny of others. You must never forget that. It's never about you. It's about you having the privilege to serve others. You subordinate your own interest, you'll miss birthdays, you'll miss weddings, and you'll miss a whole lot of stuff you want to do But when you accept that title of a leader, you do what you have to do. And it's sometimes not convenient, but you're still the leader. And as you look at the arc of leadership, and even me as in police and military and all these jobs where I had the privilege to lead, and what you see in common is that I'm going from a very small scope and span of leadership, which is 2 brothers and a sister, to caring for the United States with 340 million people. And not only that, but your allies who rely on you around the world with different health ministries that you deal with. The values and characteristics of the leader don't change. All that changes is the scope and scale of your leadership. And back to your question, good leaders surround themselves with equally competent, if not more competent leaders. Good leaders, first and foremost, when you surround yourself with those people, have to give them the permission to speak truth to power. If you don't give them that permission up front directly, then they're always going to tell you the emperor always has clothes. Okay? That you're the handsomest person in the room. That your boy, boss, you're so smart. I'm so happy I work with you. Yet what you really want to hear is, boss, this is a bad idea. Let me tell you why. And they have to have the permission to speak that truth, because otherwise they're fear for their own challenges, their own careers. We see it playing out in politics today. No specifics mentioned. And so I give examples. When I became Surgeon General, there were several admirals that reported to me, and I worked with a lot of very senior officers. But the guys that were most close to me on a daily basis, who ran operations and planning and logistics and all of those things, on Saturday mornings, we would have a meeting in civilian clothes, and we would talk about the coming week. And we'd have discussions. Well, what's going to happen? What do we need to do? So on and so forth, just like any big business. And what I started to find out was that, are they really telling me the truth? So we had some frank discussions that you guys have to. And after a while, it was wonderful because I'd come up with a great idea. I remember one time in particular, there was an issue that I wanted to move forward, and we got to do this, and we're going to do it next week, and I want to get it on the legislative calendar. And the admiral who was my chief of staff, he looks at me, he says, boss, it's a great idea, but your timing sucks. Here's why. Because I didn't look closely at the legislative calendar. And they were not going to pay it. If something was burning that week, they weren't even going to put out the fire because there was something more important. So back to your point, after a while, we were a family. They knew that I was in charge, but I didn't have to tell them I was in charge because I earned the right to be a leader. They knew that they can tell me ugly truths and it wasn't going to affect their position. In fact, it would strengthen their position because I expect that of them so that we don't make mistakes. So back to your point, it's how the leader sets the tone. It's how the leader brings in the team members around them and empowers them. As I call it, each leader, sub-leader has a box. Here's your box. Here are your authorities. Here is your budgetary authority. All I want to know once a week, you give me a summary of what's going on. You don't have to check with me because I trust you. I wouldn't have you in this position unless I trusted you. And then it works well. And the way I define the perfect leadership, it runs like a symphony. My job is to be the conductor. I give out the music sheet and I make sure everybody's playing on key. If they're off key, we're not accomplishing our mission. But then it empowers them because what I'm really doing too is I'm creating the next group of leaders because they're running their own divisions and sections and all of that. And I just have to set what the tone is, and I have to set the fact of our objectives that they all around a common value proposition. So it's very exciting when you get to do that. And then when you step back and you go, wow, this is on automatic pilot. These guys are making me look very smart, okay? Because I surrounded myself with great leaders.
I definitely feel that way. I'm so privileged to work with the team that I do at IWBI. And oftentimes when you're doing work in market transformation, which I've done for most of my career, you'll hear people say, our goal is to put ourselves out of a job. Like once we've transformed the market, we'll be out of a job. Never gotten to that point, but in pursuit of it, I kind of feel the same way about leadership, that your goal as the head of an organization in some ways is to make yourself obsolete. Like that is what succession planning is in a way, is to make sure that a huge part of what you're thinking about in terms of the health of the organization are the leaders who are going to step up and take the helm when it's time. I want to.
You know what, Rachel? Before you go on the next one, just one thing. Something that you just said that reminded me. one of the most important first things that a leader does is succession planning when you take office. Who is going to be here? If the bus hits me tomorrow, where's the continuity of operations for this organization? Succession planning is number one. Like the public boards I sit on, every board meeting, we're talking succession planning because we owe it to the shareholders to have a leader in place should something bad happen to the leader today. And if that leader is going to retire in a year before, we're planning who the next leader would be. So succession planning is extraordinarily important. One of the biggest risks in corporate America is not doing that, and then your stock price tumbles, okay? People lose confidence in you. The market doesn't trust you. So succession is really important, whether it's in well and how you've done any of the jobs that I've had. It's always something you have to do up front, and it should be on the agenda on a regular basis to make sure, because when you talk succession planning, what you're really talking is, how am I educating these young men and women to move to the next position, to take over whatever our value proposition is?
That's right. Well, shout out to one of your fellow governance, our fellow governance council members, Rick Fedrizzi, who
Yes.
is also a big believer in succession planning, and without whose sponsorship and mentorship and succession planning, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yes.
A somewhat unlikely candidate, some might say, for this job by the books.
I would disagree. I would say I know Rick very well, and I know the board, and I don't think there's a person that doubts the authenticity of your leadership, your passion, your commitment, and your willingness to hear the inconvenient truth at times so that you can correct the trajectory of whatever course you're on. So I will disagree with you on that one. You've learned that.
I don't know if you can see, I'm blushing. I want to stay on this topic of inconvenient truths or hard truths. The position of Surgeon General is the highest honor or rank in the United States. Fun fact, you're one of only, is it 2 surgeons to have ever served in the
Real
role
surgeon.
of U.S. Surgeon General, like real surgeon? Pretty cool.
Me and Chick Coop, Surgeon General Coop and I only. And let me just comment on the reason is that for many years when physicians were licensed, going back, back President Adams in 1798 was the one who came up with this idea of a health service, and that's where the public health service came from. But back when docs, even today, when they're licensed, often their license will say physician and surgeon, because going back 50, even 100 years ago, surgeons were not, a doctor was a surgeon. The guy who did your appendix was just a primary care doc because there weren't specialties. So that continued, and the license says physician and surgeon. And many of the surgeon generals prior to me, I was number 17, that's going back into the 19th century, were primary care doctors. And that's not anything derogatory or diminishing. It's just that's the way the history was. The fact that 2 surgeons became surgeon generals was by accident because it wasn't planned that way. And Coop and I would always joke about it that, well, and Chick Coop, who was also an icon, the father of pediatric surgery in the world, basically used to say to me, he's the one that reminded me, he says, Rich, we're the only 2 that are really surgeons, and not that really makes a difference. It was just an interesting anecdote in history.
Well, there was something that came in through the chat, someone complimenting you on your grace under pressure, your resilience in a stressful situation on a 1-minute countdown clock. And certainly that's something that surgeons are trained in. They come up in that, the real-time emergency that is the operating room.
What's interesting, Rachel, and all the positions I've had in my life, every one of them was kind of as a paramedic, as a police officer, as a registered nurse. Running a SWAT team is not something without stress. And homicide detective, that's the other side. But then also, being a surgeon general. I mean, every one of them puts you in positions of having sometimes to act immediately with limited information to be able to do something positive for a community or the world. And you'd like to have more time, but often life doesn't afford you a crowdsourcing of information and lots of seminars and let's discuss this. Something bad is happening now, and you have and so the best leaders have humility. They are humble. They are very thoughtful. But at some point in an emergency, and as a trauma surgeon, for instance, when we get a call on the radio, 5 minutes out, helicopters coming in, 2 gunshot wounds, both critical. Okay, you don't have time for a consult. You don't have. The body comes in front of you, the blood pressure's down, you got a minute to save a life. What are you going to do? So when I think through my life, that arc of all those jobs, it's actually helped me to be better because I've been in that crucible of immediate decision making when it's life and death, and so it's a part of leadership that it's hard. You can talk about it theoretically, but unless you're in those jobs, you really don't know what it's like.
To push pause on the line of questioning I was going into, I think that you may have inadvertently answered Eden Gardner's question in the chat, because she was asking about tips for managing when you're the only person in the room and you don't have access to your regular support structures, the council of your team and your advisors. And I think part of what I hear you saying is that real leadership is having the self-assurance to make decisions on your own when you really need to make those decisions under the clock. Yeah.
So I'll add to that because, and this is common with all leaders. You're always, as a soldier in combat, in a special forces team, you're always thinking, what are the immediate action drills? In other words, you're on the trail, you're walking, and all of a sudden you get attacked by the enemy. You don't have time to say, hold it a second, let me think of what I'm going to do. An immediate action drill is something that primes you to do that. In law enforcement, when we are dealing with active shooters, okay, you don't have time to plan. You move the threat to eliminate the threat, and you expose yourself if you have to. And so when I think about it, it's all of these things that you're always thinking a step ahead. And the way I always look at it is, and many of my colleague friends that are leaders, and when I teach this is, things may be going well, but you should always be asking yourself, what could go wrong here? What is it that I have to be prepared for in the environment I'm in? Whether you're in a finance, if you're in business, it doesn't make a difference. But as a police officer, as a paramedic, working search and rescue, there's always that moment that you're challenged, and you never. What we always used to say is that you never want to be challenged with something that means life or death right now, and you haven't thought about an immediate action drill. So when we train police officers going through training, and we give them scenarios, you're in a bank and you're third or fourth in line, and you see the guy in front of you takes out a gun and points it at the teller. What would you do? Bank is full, there's people all around, and you walk them through it. And then you say, okay, he didn't harm anybody, so you're not doing anything. You'll get him outside because you don't want to hurt anybody. What if he fires a shot now in the bank? What would you do? Okay. And then you make it difficult for them. I didn't tell you, you have your two twin girls, each are holding your hands, and the guy fires a shot. Now what do you do? But those are the situations that you don't have time to think about. So you're always working on immediate action drills. What do I do in a very critical moment? Whether you're a trauma surgeon, whether you're an emergency nurse, whether you're a police officer, or whether you're a surgeon general. Something bad is happening. What do I do now that it's not about me? It's about me having responsibility for the destiny of others. What do I do to make this condition better? And so again, scope and scale is all that changes. The approach is the same. Being prepared for any eventuality.
I 1,000% agree, but I also see a lot of leaders in my orbit who have a hard time differentiating between scenario planning and preparedness and hypervigilance. And what happens when you're not managing the anxiety is managing you.
Absolutely.
And I'm very grateful for a lot of the tools that I have honed in my toolkit with 20 plus years of meditating and doing yoga and really focusing on quality sleep and other things that I've really had to reach for in this job in particular, because one thing is for certain: when you're at the top of the chain, the stress is constant. You are dealing with everyone's worst day, every intractable problem that someone else couldn't solve. That is the job. So how do you manage that level of stress? Like, how do you keep yourself from lapsing into hypervigilance and constant worry and constantly focusing on what is the worst case scenario, as opposed to really staying in that place of possibility and driving your team toward the best case scenario?
Well, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, you have to take care of yourself. So like I tell my guys, take an hour, work out, go for a walk, meditate, do something, hang out with your kids, watch a baseball game, do whatever it is that you like to do it, have some time that you can think, have some time that you can triage the problems before you. Triage is very important. You know, you're faced with 100 things before you. What's important? What do I have to do today? What can I put off till tomorrow? What is life threatening? So you have filters that you start looking at things. And as the scope and scale of leadership expands, like in your position, I mean, you're dealing from everything from A to Z, personnel issues, financial issues, fundraising, you know, so what's important? And so that's part of the triage. And so what you want to do is become a master of whatever you do. And the way you do that, you maximize your education. You surround yourself with smart people who have been there before and learn from that. You learn from your mistakes. In all of the jobs I was in, I'll give you another example. Like in the trauma room, one of the most stressful places is when that helicopter lands and they wheel this in and the paramedic says, this gentleman was shot 3 times, his blood pressure's 40, and you know, he's only got a couple of minutes. And what you see on TV, the screaming and the yelling and throwing things in the room, doesn't work. So I remember early on when I came into this, where the program wasn't there, and I was recruited to start the program, and I watched. So I started just having classes, and even though I wasn't on call, I would go in every time there was a call, and I'd watch the surgeons work. And eventually I'd say, here's what's going to go. Anesthesia, you're at the head of the table. Your job is solely to make sure that person has an airway. Your job is to put the IV in. Your job is to do this. And all of us have to listen to that paramedic give us a 30-second history on what happened. And there doesn't have to be any discussion. It should go like a symphony. It should flow. And so what happens is it brings the tension in the room down. And it's very calm. Even though it's life and death, everybody knows their job. Everybody has confidence in the leader. We know what we're doing. And it's the same in any job that you have. That's the edge, you know, in the trauma. But whether it's a law enforcement, whether it's business, whether it's in your job, you have 20 people banging on your door every day wanting something. How do I triage it? Is it important? What is it going to bring value to what I have to accomplish today, tomorrow, over the next week? So I think all of those things are important. Understanding how to triage, preparing yourself in your mind, developing the neural networks to support those bad situations, and making sure you take time for yourself so that you're not constantly consumed with stress.
Absolutely. And I think a part of, for me at least, a part of not being constantly consumed with stress has involved a degree of partitioning.
Yes.
When I came into this job, I had this vision. I like interviewed all of these leaders that I admired, and I wanted to like be this like CEO that was having this like integrative approach to leadership and life. Like I was, you know, my life would be my leadership would be my life. What is work-life boundary anyway? And I have honestly found it's the opposite. Like what especially in becoming a parent 2 years ago, I have found that I have to be able to turn it off, give myself permission to step away from the job completely. And honestly, I don't think the job taught me that so much as my son, because I felt called to do that. Like he is worth it. He deserves my full attention right now. And that somehow for the first time in my career gave me permission to turn off the day, to shut my brain down. I'm wondering, I mean, you're a dad, you've got 4 kids, you've got a lovely family, an amazing wife. How do you do that partitioning? Like, how do you make sure that there's enough of you left to whomever you're coming home to at the end of the day?
That may be the toughest job of a leader, especially if you have significant other at home. And that significant other knows the stresses that you're going through, whether it's in any of those jobs that I mentioned, especially as a first responder. They don't know if you're coming home. Think about that. They're watching the TV and hearing about the next explosion, the next active shooter, and they know you're on your way there. So think about the stress there, or the trauma stuff. And, you know, for me, my life has been that kind of living on the edge and trying to keep the partition. One thing I did, I never bring the job home. Job home at all, because it's stressful enough. So I partition that. And I'm very careful to, when I can, tell the positive stories of humanity that I've encountered. So I'm bringing home positive messages of things that have happened. Okay. And not the negative, because the negative they're going to read in the newspaper, you know, anyway, you know, page turns and click and all of that. So I think, you know, keeping that separation is really important. But another thing that you said that's important, being a leader is like being a parent. Okay. And now you're a new parent. You have a wonderful baby, which I got to see. And I just, but I think about it, as you're a leader of an organization, you're kind of the father or the mother of that organization. And each of those children, your coworkers, need a certain amount of attention. And it's just like having a big family. It's like, you know, the ones that don't need much attention, that they're an automatic pilot, they're good students and so on, and others that need a little bit more tending, feeding and watering. And so the job of the leader is to understand the unique characteristics of each of their subordinates, especially the reports, and how much fits into that box you can give them, how much education they need to get to the next level, because that's part of succession planning. And as you know, in corporate America, we'll have a matrix of all of the Section 16 leaders, for instance, and all of their strengths and weaknesses. And then it's up to the CEO to say, okay, we need to move Joe to this position for a year to get them ready because they haven't had that experience. This one needs to go to finance. This one should go to personnel, whatever. But you're constantly trying to raise the standard of all of your potential successors. Well, isn't that what you're doing with your children? You're getting them educated, preparing them for the future. So I look at leadership as kind of being a big parent with equal responsibilities, just different. But as a parent, you're creating what is going to be future leaders. Okay? And in the business, you're returning value to shareholders because you have the right leaders that are trained in those positions to bring value to whatever you do, and whatever widget you're making or have policy, it doesn't make a difference. And the more you get those good people to surround you, as you will have experienced, you have more time for the bigger critical thinking as to the actual strategy to move to the next level. When you're pulled into levels below you and you're distracted having to take over because something happened that wasn't expected, somebody didn't do their job, that actually hurts the organization because you're not doing what we hired you for, which was the big thinking, moving the organization forward. Now, that brings into play another question. What do you do when somebody does fail in your leadership? And that's what I call a teachable moment. If you hired well and they're good people and they made a mistake, that's okay. That's when it's a teachable moment. So I use an example early in my career where I learned it, where as a young soldier, I had made a mistake, and the commander, I thought, okay, this is it. My career is over. He came over, sat down next to me, says, I know you're working pretty hard. I said, this was a tough problem. Gives me some counseling. And he says, how do you feel now? I said, well, I'm embarrassed. I should have known that. He said, well, as a leader, and this is what he says, as a leader, my first question is, did I prepare you for the job I gave you? Because maybe it was my fault, not your fault. Okay. And I use it often. So the first question I ask when there's a failure, was that person prepared for that job? And if it was not me, if it's me, I fix it. If it's not me, I talk to them. And in this case, that commander put his arm around me. He says, you know what? You're still kind of early, and I probably should have spent a little more time with you. You're going to be fine. And he said, don't worry about it. But you're worried about, there goes your career. So as a teachable moment, when that happens with a good person, what you actually do is engender even more camaraderie, because that person will talk to everybody and say, he didn't fire me. He actually told me about a problem he had and how he dealt with it. And then he asked me at the end, what would you do differently next time?
That's
the key.
I think that's a part of that psychological safety is giving people a sense of security around the concept of failure. This is something that my co-partner in leading IWBI, Pratikana, is so good at, is giving people space to fail. That's something I really struggle with, because I struggle with failure in the first place. Like, I am a person who wants to do everything I can not to. And I it's something I admire so much in him and in you. And I remember the first time I really messed up in my first big job, and I was sitting in the office of my boss crying, and he reached across the table and shook my hand and said, congratulations, you failed. You only have to do it 99 more times.
There you go.
And just like you're saying, that act of being supported through failure, and to have my failures even sponsored, I think was such a tremendous act of sponsorship.
Yes. And let's think about this too. The other thing that it does that is so important, and that's not why you do it, but it's like, that person now has a bond with you, like you're inseparable. They'll fall on a knife for you, okay? And what they do is it starts to engender camaraderie, because as they tell their story of the fear and what happened and what they went through, the team comes closer together, because they all realize, and the bond that you're all in it together, and the boss is going to support us, as long as we're doing our job, as long as we're not, derelict in duty, and so on and so forth. So I found that it's a powerful tool that a leader can use to engender further camaraderie and teamsmanship to accomplish a mission.
Yeah, I think that is a very profound point, that it builds, not detracts from
Yes.
the team. Yeah,
If used
yeah,
correctly.
absolutely.
Yeah. But
If
here's
used
the other
correctly.
thing I mentioned, Rachel. When I teach leadership, I often talk, there's the two I's in leadership. You have leaders that lead by intimidation. I'm going to fire you. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to, on and on and on. And so what's the likelihood they're going to talk to you, tell you anything? They're going to stay away from you. But on the other side, the leaders that are inspirational, you want to be around. And like in the military, we talk, if you want to develop as a strong leader so your troops will follow you into battle, even though their lives may be at risk, you must inspire them. And how do you do that? You stay connected to them. You work with them, okay? And so the intimidation doesn't work. And I often say, there's a honeymoon period when you get promoted in whatever job, civilian or in military, what we call stripes or stars. And so after a few weeks or a month, if you have to keep telling people you're the leader, you ain't the leader, okay? Because leadership is earned. And if you are a poor leader and lead by intimidation, probably the people are going to go to your subordinate to get direction rather than you, because they don't want to have anything to do with you. So understanding how to inspire others. And I can give you an example of that one, because it was one that I was confounded with when I was Surgeon General. And I was at the White House, we were having meetings, and there was the physical performance of our soldiers, sailors, and airmen were dropping. And when you started to look at it, multiple deployments over several years in combat, losing your friends in combat. So it's no surprise that this is happening. So I was told, you need to fix this. So a bunch of people said, sir, you want us to draft a memo for you to order the troops to be better in shape, and said blah, blah, blah. And I thought about it and I said, no, I don't think that's the way. I mean, they've already got enough intimidation and embarrassment, and it's not going to help the force. So I told my aide, I said, in the military, you can take you have to take annual PT tests, physical training tests. We have to run, do push-ups, things like that, to show that you are ready to be deployed. Because if you're not physically fit, you can't be deployed. So I told my aide, I said, get me a list of all the training sites where we're doing our PT test. And the first one was up in a place called Fort Meade, Maryland. I said, so when I said to him, Commander, I said, we're going to go. I said, wear your PT gear that day. He said, well, I already took my PT test. I said, sir, no, wear your PT gear. So we get in the car, and I had a special car, and we had security, and then had the stars in the front. So when you drove on the base, they knew who you were. And so we drive up there, and there's hundreds of guys waiting to take their PT test. And a young officer, calls everybody to attention. I said, oh, as you were. And he says to me, sir, it's so great you're here today. If you'll just stand over here, the troops would love you to stand by and watch. I said, oh, no, I'm here to take my PT test. He said, sir, you don't have to do that. I said, well, why would I ask you to do something that I wouldn't do? So I took my PT test, and these kids were literally my children's age. And I knew I wouldn't embarrass myself because I kept myself in shape. So I did the PT test. I did very well. But what I did was, at the end of the run, and I finished in the top 10%. I stood at the end of the finish line, and I gave each kid a high five. And I said, thanks for your service. Thanks for your service. And then we did that with sit-ups, and we did it with push-ups. And then for some who were injured and couldn't run, they could swim. So I said, well, I'm going to go do the swim. He said, sir, you maxed the test. You don't need it. I said, no, I'm going to go swim. So I went in and swam. And very good swimmer, because as I said, I've been an ocean lifeguard and scuba school and all that. So I came out first in the swim, and I sat on the deck, and I had my aide bring me a stack of towels. And as each kid got out of the pool, I gave him a towel. And I said, hey, thanks, man. That was a good swim. Congratulations. And they're all wondering, how did this old guy, and we tracked over the next 2 years. 2 years later, when we looked at performance, it was the highest ever, because I randomly started showing up at bases and taking a PT test. And if nothing else, they were embarrassed to be beat by an old guy. Okay.
All right, Dr. Carmona, next time we're together, I'm going to make you drop and give me 20. I am so impressed by this story. But there's also a long list of people who are in the chat talking about how amazing.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. They're just saying this is inspiring. Like, it's such a great example, and really like a metaphor for the style of leadership, your brand of leadership. Yeah, just awesome story.
It's a privilege to lead, and I never forget that. That's one of the things I drill to people when I talk about leadership. You never forget, it's never about you. It's always about them, and you're privileged to lead them. And no matter how small or big, you are essentially responsible for the destiny of others. And so
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
going to get up earlier, you're going to stay up later, you're going to handle the problems. And if you don't want to be a leader, then step away.
There are a few people who I think have taken that responsibility of leadership as seriously as you. And I said we were going to get back to this conversation around the
Yes,
hard truths. Um,
yes,
a surgeon general is a politically appointed position.
yes,
And you served in an administration under Bush that at times conflicted with your personal values, or perhaps even what you saw in terms of the science and the literature. And that must have been a really uncomfortable feeling. And in fact, following your service, you spoke out, for instance, about how scientific findings in some cases were suppressed because they conflicted
yes,
with the administration's
yes,
ideological agenda.
yes,
So I'd love for you to talk about some of
sure.
the most challenging things you had to do
Yeah,
as Surgeon General,
yeah,
and how you managed to that dissonance between your own
sure.
internal compass and the
Yes,
compass of the
right.
administration you were serving under.
So it's a great question. Thank you for asking. And I want to point out that it was not only me, every surgeon general and every administration has this problem. I can cite one for you, that Chick Coop. Some of it may not be that old, but when AIDS was first discovered in the 70s and 80s, and Coop was the surgeon general, he basically looked at this and wanted to communicate with the public. It was at a time when the conservative administration was, one senator in particular was saying that in public, in Congress, making statements that this was God's way of punishing homosexuals. Okay. And Coop stood up and said, no, this is an infectious disease. It has nothing to do. And Coop himself was a Mennonite, and we're dear friends. He told me they picked me because they thought I was conservative, but he said I was a doctor first. That has nothing to do. And so I had wonderful conversations with him where he stood up and basically told those inconvenient truths. They threatened to fire him because he tried to make public statements about it. But President Reagan actually said he's correct. Don't fire him. Okay. And so what he had to do was send out mailings because they forbid him from going on TV. So he sent out mailings and Social Security mailers to talk about being careful in your sexual activity. And back then, you don't talk about those things in public, especially in the conservative world. So I just want to make the point, it's not just me. Every surgeon general who approaches this from the position of a doctor, where you don't care if a person's a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, I'm here to make sure I protect your health. That's it. Okay. And so in politics, though, it becomes divisive. I will say that in President Bush was never like that. And President Bush actually was a reasonable guy. We had some differences, but I recognize as an officer, as the president, he has the right to drive policy. The policies weren't his problem. It was the middle level people who were all trying to ingratiate themselves to the higher ups who didn't want us to do this. You know, I had a Surgeon General's report on women's health, and they didn't want to release it because I didn't give credit to a political party. I said I won't put that in there, because then it'll degrade the thing. So where I generated a negative press, which wasn't often, it was because it was important enough that I stood up and told the inconvenient truth about what was best for health. And that's not about politics. My job wasn't politics. Their jobs is politics. But you elect those people to make those decisions. I get nominated to be a surgeon general, and my job is to treat the nation as if that's my one patient. Okay. And I'm always going to make decisions that's in the best interest of you, the patient, and with my allies around the world. So there's the push and pull that happens in a political situation. Every surgeon general, though, it's not just me. I wasn't a martyr. I had my time in the spotlight, and but most importantly, I never breached my integrity, and I knew when I came home I would be judged by how I handled those difficult decisions. And did I always do the correct thing for the people? When I went back to the faculty, professors, policy people, no one ever accused me of prostituting my office for politics. Never.
Such a profound insight and piece of advice, especially for this moment in time. How is it possible that we only have 3 minutes left? I have a million more questions that I want to ask you, so I hope you'll come back for round two.
Oh, for sure.
And so fun. Clear that from the chat that other folks feel similarly.
Rachel,
I often, go ahead, Dr.
Any chance I get to hang out with you is always productive. I love our conversation. You know, you're so well grounded, and you have such great heart, and you're so smart. And I mean, that's the kind of people I love to surround myself with, because I never have to worry about your integrity or your ability. I mean, you're the person that you go do that, and you know it's going to come back better than you expected. So
Thank
we're fortunate to have you in a leadership position. That's why I love working with you. I love discussing complex issues with you, because we always arrive at what's in the best interest of those we have the privilege to serve.
Well, I am privileged anytime I get to be in your presence. I really mean that. And I'm just so glad that we got an opportunity to share some of your wisdom with a broader swath of our community. Usually I end these types of conversations by inviting you to share one final tip. And this time, the last question that I'd love to pose to you actually comes in the Q&A from
Yes.
Joseph Scarpa. What is one tip that you have for a new leader who's arriving at a new organization?
I will go back to guidance my mother gave me. It kind of came from Shakespeare. To thine own self be true. Don't breach your integrity. Always do the right. And if, like my mom would say, I gave you the right values, you make good decisions. Don't let people sway you away from what is correct. So be true to yourself.
Love that so much. Also, because I was a Renaissance literature major, so any opportunity to quote Shakespeare is a good day. Wow, what a way to kick off the Well Executive Platform launch. We're going to be debuting this webcast series, a podcast series later this year, intimate executive convenings, allowing all of you to get up close and personal with some of the most epic leaders of our time. This one, though, is going to be hard to match. I'd like to thank Daikin once again, whose generous support makes this series and burgeoning platform possible. Here's to the next 100 years of innovation. A huge thanks to my team that helped to pull this together, and a shout out to all of the other members of our governance council who joined on the line. Can't wait for you to be starring in this show. And most of all, Dr. Carmona, thank you. You are just an inspiration, and we are also humbled to be able to learn from you and to glean all of the wisdom that you have to share. Before we close, please be sure to sign up for updates on podcasts and webcast releases through the link that we've shared in the chat. Do all the things. Follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, you know where to find us. Thank you all so much for joining. And once again, thank you, Dr. Carmona.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been wonderful. My privilege.